So magandang araw po sa inyong lahat. Kami po ang Group 10 at kinagagalak namin i-present sa inyo ang aming topic na Environmental Crisis and Sustainable Development. Ang mga miyembro po ng aming grupo ay ako po si Tariala Sarvet Saril, kasama ko sila Valdez, Julian at Velasco Marie Vincent. So, ang global environmental crisis ay hindi na isang abstract threat sa hinaharap. Ito ay isang tangible daily reality na nararanasan na nating lahat. The degradation manifests immediately sa hangin na nilalanghap natin, sa tubig na nakikita natin, at sa mga lugar na dinadaanan natin araw-araw. So, para mas maintindihan natin ito, gamitin nating halimbawa ang isang simple daily commute sa Metropolitan Manila. So, dito, yung crisis ay hindi lang isang konsepto. Ito ay isang sensory experience. So, ang karanasan ay nagmumula sa sandaling tumapak sa labas ng bahay, agad mong maaamoy ang fetid smell of uncollected garbage, at kung titingnan mo ang basurahan, ay makikita mo ang pinagmulan nito. May mga pinaghalong nabubulok na gulay, bangkay ng daga, at tambak na plastic na hindi natutunaw. So, this isn't just about the unpleasantness, ito ay palatandaan ng systemic environmental problems at nagdudulot ng immediate health risk. Dito namumungad yung mga peste, malapit sa lugar kung saan pa naglalaro yung mga bata. Ang paglalakbay papuntang trabaho o eskwelahan na nagpapatuloy sa immersion sa pollution. So halimbawa dito is sa isang bus sa EDSA, hindi natin may iwasan ang mga senyales ng pollution. So ang usok na mula sa mga diesel na sasakyan ay bumabalot sa paligid at sa langit ay natatakpan naman ng persistent smog. At kapag tinitingnan natin ang Pasig River, ito ay isang malinaw na simbolo ng kapabayaan, puno ng oil spots at basura. It is a dying river in an increasingly poisonous city. So, ang mga localized failures na ito ay ang bumubuo sa mas malawak na systemic crisis. At ang mga sensory assaults na nararanasan natin dito ay hindi isolated cases. Ito ang lokal na muka ng global challenges na tatalakayin natin ngayon. Ngayon, mula sa personal na karanasan, tingnan natin ang mas malaking picture. So, ano nga ba yung pangunahing environmental problems na hinaharap natin ngayon? So, according to the Conserve Energy Future is meron tayong 13 urgent challenges na kailangan nating malaman. So, narito po muna yung unang 6 na global challenges, environmental challenges. First, we have the pollution and waste. Second is the climate and weather change. Third is the overpopulation. Fourth is we have the resource depletion. Ito yung mga nauubusan na tayo ng non-renewable resources tulad ng mga langis, minerals, at maging sa malinis na tubig. Then, panglima is a waste disposal catastrophe. Ito yung mga plastic, packaging, e-waste. Lahat ito tambak sa landfill and oceans na hindi na kayang saluhin ng ating mundo. Pang-anim is we have the biodiversity loss. Ang mga gubat, coral reefs, at buong ecosystems ay nasisira. Like maraming species na yung nawawala. Ipagpatuloy po natin yung listahan. So, sa pangpito, we have atmospheric changes. So, dahil sa deforestation, nababawasan yung oxygen at tumataas yung carbon dioxide. So, yung ocean acidity ay tumataas na ng 150% in just 250 years. We have also the ozone depletion, the acid rain. So, pag sinabi natin yung acid rain, ito po yung mga sanhi ng mga fossil fuels, mga bulkan at nabubulok na basura. So, pinapatay nito yung mga pananim, kagubatan, at yung aquatic life. Pang-10 is we have the water contamination, and pang-11 naman is urban sprawl. Ito yung mga syudad na lumalawak ng walang kontrol. Sinisira nito yung mga sakahan, tsaka nagdudulot na ng matinding traffic at permanent smog. Pang-12, we have the public health threats. At lastly, we have the food system alteration. So, ito yung mga paggamit ng mga genetically modified food na nagpapabago sa ating paraan ng pagtatanim, pagkain, at survival. Ngayon nakikita na natin ang ano ng crisis. So, kailangan naman natin ngayong suriin ang bakit. So, saan nanggagaling ang lahat nito? Magsimula tayo sa kalikasan. So, natural events can drastically affect the environment. Halimbawa po ay ang mga volcanic eruptions. So, bukod sa abo at lava, ay naglalabas ito ng toxic gases na kayang magpalamig ng planeta. Ang Kilauea volcano sa Hawaii, for example, ay naglalabas ng sulfur dioxide na doble pa sa pinakamaruming power plant sa US. So, ang eruption naman ng Mount Pinatubo noong June 15, 2001 ay nag-release ng 15 to 20 megatons ng sulfur dioxide. At ang resulta naman nito ay bumaba yung global temperature ng 0.6 degrees Celsius for 15 months. So pinapakita nito na ang kalikasan mismo ay isang powerful force for environmental change. So this slide shows the impact of man-made and human excavated pollution. So nakikita natin dito yung plastic waste sa mga ilog, smog sa mga lungsod, at industrial emissions na galing sa factories. Lahat ng ito ay resulta ng human activities, overproduction, poor waste management, at kulang sa environmental safeguard. Hindi ito aksidente. It's the consequences of our choices. Kung hindi natin babaguhin ang paraan ng produksyon at konsumo, ay mas lalong lalala ang damage sa environment. Pero habang may papel ang kalikasan, ang pangunahing dahilan ng krisis ngayon ay human activity. So, tingnan natin yung ah, ang air pollution. So sa Riyadh, Saudi Arabia, ang makapal na sandstorm ay humahalo sa toxic exhaust mula sa mga sasakyan at dahil dito, ito yung most polluted cities in the world. Sa India naman, noong 2015 is napaka-alarming na ng air pollution levels. Pero ang mas malala is sa 89 na syudad. 17 lang yung may proper air quality monitoring system at parang lumalaban tayo sa kalaban na hindi natin nakikita. At sa Africa is merong 94% ng population sa Nigeria ay exposed sa delikadong air pollution. So, kapag iisipin natin ang environmental crisis, madalas na hangin ang una nating naiisip. Pero ang lupa at tubig, mga bagay na hindi agad natin nakikita, ay unti-unti na ring nalalason. So, sa China, ang coal fumes ay sumingaw sa lupa at nakontaminate yung 20% ng kanilang buong bansa. Sa Hunan at Zhuzhou, ang mga minahan ay naglalabas ng heavy metals sa kanilang rice-producing areas at yung mga toxic products ay naglilikha ng much more rapidly than the earth can absorb. Sa West Virginia, USA naman, ang mga coal mines ay nagtatapon ng chemical-laced wastewater sa ilalim ng lupa. Ang dating malinis sa tubig ay tinatawag ng poisonous cocktail of chemicals. At sa Malenchken, India naman, ang pinakamalaking copper mine sa bansa ay naglalabas ng heavy metals sa kalapit na sapa at ang tubig na dapat ay pang-inom at pang-irrigate ay ngayon ay nagdadala na ng sakit. So, hindi lang hangin, lupa, at tubig ang nalalason, pati ang mismong galaw ng ating kalikasan. So, pollution is not no longer just about we breathe. It's changing how the earth's breathe. So, isa sa mga pangunahing driver ng global pollution is ang tinatawag na catching up development model. So, ito yung pattern na sinusundan ng maraming emerging economies. Sinusubukang gayahin ang industrial success ng Western nations. Historically is yumaman yung West dahil sa heavy industrialization at paggamit ng fossil fuels. So, ang problema is this model comes with massive environmental costs. Parang inuulit lang natin yung parehong pagkakamali pero mas mabilis, mas malawak at mas mapanganib. At kung ang development, ang goal is dapat kasama sa usapan natin ang ating kalikasan. So, when it comes to the pollution, the United States po ang nag-set ng traveling precedent. So, tinatawag itong the worst polluter in the history of the world. So, sila yung responsable sa 27% ng global carbon dioxide emissions. At yung 60% ng emissions na ito ay galing sa mga sasakyan. Ang natitira naman ay galing sa mga pabrika, forest fires, at iba pa. So, this model of development is high consumption, heavy emissions ay siyang ginagaya ngayon ng marami at ito yung naglalagay sa ating planeta sa panganib. Dahil dito, yung mga developing countries tulad ng China, India at Indonesia ay nasa isang frenzied race para makahabol sa West. So, ang kapalit nito is overconsumption, waste at massive environmental pollution. So, marami sa kanila ay nagiging extractive or terminal economies. Umaasa sa langis, gubat, at mineral para pondohan ang industrialization. So, tingnan natin ang Nigeria. Ang kanilang paglaban sa kahirapan ay nakadepende sa oil production sa Niger Delta. So, pero ito rin yung mismong sanhi ng matinding land, water, and air pollution sa kanilang lugar. So, the question is, can we grow without destroying? Kasi kung ang development ang goal, dapat sustainable ang paraan. So, ito po yung critical na tanong na kailangan nating harapin. So, can we really protect the environment while lifting people out of poverty? Is it possible to grow an economy without over-consuming and polluting? And kung ang cheap energy ang nagpapatakbo ng ekonomiya, pero ito rin yung sumisira sa kalikasan, so where do we draw the line? At ang pinakamahalagang tanong is, can we build a better life without breaking the planet? So kapag pinag-usapan ang polusyon, ang kasunod na tanong ay sino ang pinaka-apektado? So every year, pollution causes over 500,000 premature deaths. At noong 2010 lang, is nagkaroon ng 223,000 na tao ang namatay sa lung cancer dahil sa air pollution. Pero hindi pantay yung epekto nito. So, ayon sa isang Yale study, ang mga mahihirap na komunidad at people of color ay mas malaki yung tsansang manirahan sa mga lugar na may toxic air pollution. So we ask, why do those with the least resources bear the greatest burden? So, let's look at real places and real people. So, sa India, may 46% ng mga tao sa Delhi at 56% sa Calcutta ay may impaired lung function dahil sa matinding air pollution. Sa China naman, ang village ng Shinma ay nalason ng cadmium. So, dalawa yung namatay dito at 150 yung nalason. At ang buong village naman ay kinakailangang abandonahin. At dito sa Manila is 37% ng population o 4 na milyong tao ay nakatira sa slums. Sila yung humaharap sa pinakamatinding environmental risk. So ayon kay Marife Ballesteros, this deepens poverty and excludes the slums poor from growth. At narito po yung isang malaking irony sa urban pollution. Ang mga mismong paraan ng ating transportation na ginagamit sa mga ordinaryong tao ay isa ring malaking sanhi ng pollution. First, we have the public buses. So, ang pangunahing transportasyon ng masa ay isa sa largest contributors to environmental pollution problems worldwide. Second is the motorbike. So sa Delhi, 75 to 80% ng traffic ay two-wheelers. So mas malakas yung ibinubuga nilang usok at carbon monoxide. Yung pangatlo naman is the diesel cars. So mas mura man pero kayang maglabas ng 4 na beses na mas maraming toxic pollution kaysa sa mga bus. So that's all. Ngayon naman tawagin natin si Miss Valdez para ipagpatuloy ang ating report.
For that, Ms. Dariela. To continue our discussion, pag-usapan naman natin ang climate change. Climate change is considered a major threat to global stability and human welfare. Ibig sabihin nito, hindi lang ito environmental issue, kundi may epekto din ito sa economy, health, food supply, at overall quality of life. Human-made climate change is often described as one of the greatest risks facing humanity today dahil lahat tayo ay apektado regardless of country or income level. Ang main issue dito ay global warming. Nangyayari ito dahil sa pagdami ng greenhouse gases tulad ng carbon dioxide kasama ang ibang air pollutants. Galing din ito sa human activities tulad ng paggamit ng fossil fuels, factories at transportation. Kapag naipon ng mga gases na ito sa atmosphere, nadatrap ito sa init ng araw. Ito ay tinatawag nating greenhouse effect. Natural lang ito at importante ito para mabuhay tayo, pero dahil sobra ang emissions, masyado nang umiinit ang mundo. Mas alarming pa yun ayon sa scientists dahil mas mabilis ang pagtaas ng global temperature sa last 50 years kumpara sa anumang panahon sa history. Dahil hindi ito limitado sa isang bansa, ang climate change ay isang global crisis na kailangang harapin ng bawat governments. Kaya ngayon, pag-usapan naman natin saan nanggagaling ang emission. Karamihan ng mga pollution ay galing sa power plants, vehicles, factories, farming activities at waste management. Kahit yung mga everyday activities natin ay may contribution din dito. Historically speaking, ang United States ay isa sa pinakamalaking polluters. Pero noong 2011, China ang naging number 1 at carbon dioxide emission. Sinundan ito ng US at India dahil ito sa mabilis na industrial growth at malaking population nila. Marami ring Asian countries ang patuloy pa ring tumataas ang emissions, pero may positive side ito, kagaya na lang ng European Union, Germany at Russia na nagpapababa ng emissions sa pamamagitan ng stricter environmental policies at paggamit ng renewable energy. Pinapakita nito na kahit ang global problem, pwede pa rin nating gawan ng paraan kung ang bawat isa ay magtutulungan. Next, tingnan naman natin ang epekto ng climate change na ramdam na natin ngayon. Isa sa pinaka-obvious ay paglala ng extreme weather events. Mas madalas at mas malakas ang heat waves, droughts, heavy rains, typhoons at hurricanes. Example nito ay Typhoon Haiyan noong 2013, Hurricane Katrina noong 2005, at Hurricane Sandy noong 2012. These disasters caused massive damage sa lives at infrastructure. Sa usapan naman ng water and ice, ang Antarctica ay nawawalan ng around 134 billion tons of ice every year na nagdudulot ng sea level rise. Dahil dito, maraming coastal areas ang binabaha, habang ibang lugar naman ay nakakaranas ng matinding drought tulad ng California. Sa Asia at Africa naman, lumalala ang desertification at sa China naman, halos 28,000 rivers ang nawawala. Meron din ito ecological at health impacts. Sa coral reef tulad ng Great Barrier Reef ay namamatay dahil sa ocean warming. Naapektuhan din ito ang food supply dahil nagbabago ang monsoon patterns. Sa health side naman, mas kumakalat ang diseases tulad ng dengue, malaria at cholera dahil mas favorable ang mainit na klima para sa bakterya at mga mosquitoes. Next naman, dahil global ang epekto ng climate change, global solutions din ang kailangan. Ang carbon dioxide na nilalabas ng isang bansa ay nakakaapekto sa buong mundo. Isa sa mga unang global efforts ay ang Kyoto Protocol noong 1997 na layunin na ang bawasan ang global greenhouse gas emission. Ngunit naging limited ang epekto nito lalo na't hindi sumali ang United States. Sinundan din ito ng Paris Agreement noong 2015 kung saan halos lahat ng bansa ay kasali. Dito, bawat bansa ay may sariling target sa pagbabawas ng emissions. Mas flexible ito, pero ang effectiveness nito ay nakadepende sa commitment ng bawat bansa. Bukod sa governments, mahalaga rin ang local activism. Communities, universities at environmental groups na nagtutulak ng mas mahigpit na laws at sustainable projects para mabawasan ang emissions. Ngayon, i-connect naman natin ang climate change sa economic risk. Noong early 2000, maraming bansa ang nakaranas ng economic instability dahil interconnected ang global economy. Kapag may problem ang isang bansa, nadadamay din ang iba. Ito ay malinaw na nakita noong 2007 global financial crisis. Hindi lang ito simpleng recession, kundi isang major systematic failure ng financial system. Maraming countries ang nakaranas ng job losses, income inequality, rising debt, at political instability. Napilitan din ng mga government na mangutang para masalba ang economies nila na nagdulot ng long-term financial problems. Pinakita din ng crisis na masyadong umasa ang modern economy sa debt at speculative growth imbes na sustainable at resilient system. Ngayon naman pag-usapan natin ang stability. Ang stability ay ang kakayahan ng economy na manatiling maayos at steady kahit may mga problems o biglaang pagbabago. Hindi ibig sabihin na walang ups and downs, kundi hindi masyado extreme ang galaw ng economy. Ayon sa IMF, stable ang economy kapag naiwasan ng malaking pagbabago sa growth, inflation at financial markets. Normal lang ang boom at slowdowns, pero dapat kontrolado para hindi mauwi sa crisis. Kapag stable ang economy, mas kaya nitong humarap at makabawi sa mga shocks tulad ng financial crisis o natural disasters. Pero kapag may mga events tulad ng climate change impacts, gaya ng baha at tagtuyot, pwedeng maapektuhan ang stability dahil tumataas ang presyo, nawawala ang trabaho at lumalaki ang gastos ng gobyerno. Kaya mahalaga ang stability dahil ito ang nagbibigay ng balance at resilience sa economy. Ngayon naman, pag-usapan natin ang sustainability. Ayon sa Brundtland Report of 1987, ang sustainability ay ang pagtugon sa pangangailangan ng kasalukuyan nang hindi sinasakripisyo ang kakayahan ng future generations. Kakaiba ito sa stability dahil ang sustainability ay pang long term. Focus nito ang responsible use ng resources. Kung noon iniisip ng mga economic system na unlimited ang resources, kaya naging normal ang pollution at environmental damage. Pero ngayon, malinaw na hindi sustainable ang ganitong approach lalo sa panahon ng climate change. Kaya naman tignan natin ang figure 48.1. Makikita dito sa figure 48.1 ang debt to GDP ratios ng iba't ibang bansa. Pinapakita nito kung gaano kalaki ang utang ng isang bansa kumpara sa laki ng economy nito. Kapag mataas ang debt to GDP ratio, ibig sabihin mas mabigat ang pasanin ng utang at mas mahirap itong bayaran in the long run. Ito ang nagiging problema sa financial sustainability, lalo na kung patuloy ang pag-utang para lang masuportahan ng current spending. Sa maraming bansa, lalo na sa Europe, Japan at China, may dagdag na pressure ito dahil sa aging population. Mas maraming gastos ang pension at healthcare, pero kaunti ang working population na nagbabayad ng buwis. Para sa climate change, ganito rin ang issue. Short-term benefits ngayon, long-term problems sa futures. Kapag hindi maayos ang pamamahala ng utang at resources, ang susunod na henerasyon na magbabayad ng presyo. Kaya pinapakita ng slide nito na ang sustainability ay hindi lang tungkol sa environment, kundi pati sa economy at governance. To end my part, naganda ako dito ng short video kung saan pinapakita nito ang pagkakaiba ng climate change noon at ngayon. Makikita dito kung gaano lumala ang sitwasyon at kung bakit kailangan na ng agarang aksyon.
Already feeling the devastating effects of human-caused, governments continue to fall short on making pledges that would help thwart further warming. What will the world look like in the next 30 to 80 years on the current path? While it's impossible to know how it will unfold, scientists and climate experts, factoring in the current state of affairs, to describe as bleak. But remember, it doesn't become our reality. It's flown past the 1.5-degree target that we're to. The Earth has warmed 2 degrees since the world first started burning fossil fuels in mass. It's on heat waves and wildfires regularly. Summer days exceed 40 degrees in Delhi, as extreme heat waves are now common. These high temperatures prompt wide power grids struggle to keep up with the energy demands of homes. Ambulance sirens blare through suffering from heat stroke, dehydration, and in southwestern United States, Southern Africa experienced longer, more frequent, and meanwhile, the Philippines, Indonesia, and heavy rainfall as rising temperatures cause water and trap more water in the atmosphere. Becomes more erratic. Some communities are unable building what's constantly destroyed. Many move to housing shortages and a lack of jobs. Newborn intensive care wards as the rising cause higher rates of premature and underweight develop asthma and respiratory disease, and regularly exposed to forest fire smoke to the atmosphere each year finally start to learn action, but it's decades too late within time. As a result, by 2100, another 0.5 to 1.5 degree remaining glaciers have melted as the sea heat increases due to thermal expansion, together well over a meter. Entire nations, like Tuvalu, are uninhabitable as large submerged. Some islands, like the Maldives, building interconnected rafts that house apartments, restaurants that float above its drowned cities. Migrants in Jakarta, Mumbai, and Lagos are homes once again as rising tides build buildings and crumble infrastructure. Over 1 million people are displaced. Some APC and Shanghai attempt to adapt ways. 10-meter tall seawalls. Children learn about extinct sea life, all of which have vanished thanks to rise. Grocery prices skyrocket. Water scarcity touch all communities. Food grown in the tropics and subtropics rarely show intense heat waves paired with increasing humidity to work outdoors. Unpredictable heat wave cripples small-scale farmers in Africa, Asia, who previously produced 1/3 of the hundreds of millions of people are pushed into hunger. Climate predictions can feel overwhelming and terrifying. Many of the experts responsible for these assessments, since countries have first begun taking steps to lower their projections, have shifted downwards, unless reduced our projected emission rates so that we're no 4 degrees of warming. Policies that invest resources, cut fossil fuel production, protect our forests, and regulate industry mitigate the worst effects of climate change, have also stressed that current policies enough in speed or scale, enact bold solutions, innovations, and still time to rewrite our future. And every 10.
Ayan. So now that we understand sustainability as meeting today's needs without harming future generations, the question is, can our current economic system actually deliver that? But before we proceed, let's watch the video first. Make sure you listen because ito video na to is very crucial to our report.
Business as usual won't cut it. Even though we made progress before, going back to pre-pandemic ways is not enough. We need a new paradigm built on the pillars of our 17 goals. Rethink conventions, flip the orthodoxies. Governments, organizations, corporations, citizens of the world, snap out of it. It's time for bold climate action. To act for women and girls, for social justice and inclusion. Scale up the transition to renewable energy. Create 85 million green jobs. Phase out fossil fuel subsidies and tax carbon. $2.8 trillion. Keep your promises. Support developing nations. Write off debts. Free up $1 trillion for climate resilience, people and communities. $500 billion for Africa to achieve universal energy access by 2030. Commit to a circular economy now. New resilient food systems. They can cut waste by 17%. Strengthen domestic financial institutions. Make insurance and banking accessible to everyone. Scale up the digital transformation to educate the 1.6 billion kids who missed school in the pandemic. Educate girls, including the 130 million not in school now. Ensure women's equal share of decision-making. Eliminate discrimination against female workers and boost productivity by 40%. We cannot afford to leave anyone behind. We have a to-do list. We have the resources. 8 years to reach our goals. We're on this planet together. So let's work together. Let's get the list done.
All right. So thank you for watching. I hope you learned something on that video. And if you do, you can chat your insights and comments on our comment section. So the video shows how sustainability works, but aside from that, there is a hidden message that I personally understand, and it states that if the sustainability that we're talking about is just for a short-term goal and it doesn't really provide the long-term goals and effect of it, and thus in a whole decade we were just repeating what is done, and what do you think the problem is? And that's what I'm going to discuss today. Now let's proceed. So the problem is that the economic models we rely on were designed for growth and efficiency and in the short term only. But they often ignore the long-term risk like inequality, financial crisis, and environmental damages. That's why economists today are calling for a redesign of our economic model, one that is not only about growth but also about stability and sustainability. This brings us to the idea of redesigning economic for stability and sustainability, which looks at three areas that needs rethinking. Number one, what really makes markets efficient? Number two, the need to accept diverse development models. And number three, rethinking the meaning of growth. So don't you worry because we will discuss it one by one. So complexity approach to markets. Complexity approach to markets means looking at economies as ecosystem made up of many connected parts that adapt and influence each other in unpredictable ways. Today, they're seen as complex and adaptive systems shaped by feedback loops, uncertainty, and interdependence. This means that even small problems in one part of the economy can spread quickly, making the whole system unstable, and so we need new ways to understand and manage markets. Now let's understand the complexity. The complexity approach says markets work like ecosystem. So where many factors interact at the same time. They are influenced by how people think, the psychology, how society is organized, the culture and the social rules, and even past events or the histories. And because of this, we cannot rely on economics alone to manage them. Instead, rules and policies need ideas from many fields and must focus on preventing problems before they turn into crisis. And since markets are complex and unpredictable, governments and regulators use new tools to keep them stable. This includes systemic risk monitoring or watching for problems in big institutions, the stress test, checking if banks can survive sudden shocks, and controls on high frequency trading or slowing down risky computer based trading. And the goal is not to stop every crisis, but to make the system stronger so small problems don't spread and cause a bigger collapse. And of course, one of the inevitable things, the global governance challenge. So today's markets operate across the world, but rules and regulation are mostly made by individual countries. These create gaps because big problems like climate change and financial crisis cannot be solved by one nation alone. Cooperation is often difficult since some countries avoid action and let others carry the cost, or tinatawag nating free rider problem. And to close this gap, strong countries and regional groups like the European Union play an important role in pushing for collective solutions. So, like what we've seen in the video, they're planning to take action, new action that will help them achieve a long term goal with the sustainability itself. And to sum it up, economies work like complex system full of uncertainty and connections between different parts. To keep markets stable, we need smarter tools, ideas from many fields, and stronger global cooperation. Old ways of thinking that assume markets will always balance themselves are no longer enough for today's challenges. But we aren't done yet because of that complexity, different countries need different economic models, not just one universal recipe. Pluralism in development means recognizing that there is no single best way for countries to grow their economies. Each nation has different histories, cultures, and resources, so they need different strategies that work for them. In the past, the Washington Consensus promoted a one size fits all model of free markets and liberalization, but this often failed because countries face different realities and challenges. We have these two strategies, the strict free market reforms and the state-led strategies. When we say strict free market reforms or the Washington Consensus style, this means governments step back and let markets decide everything. Examples are cutting government spending, removing trade barriers, selling state-owned companies, and reducing regulation. While state-led strategies, this means the government takes an active role in guiding the economy instead of leaving everything to the market. Examples, protecting local industries until they're strong enough to compete globally, investing heavily in education and technology, and also the giving of financial support to key industries. And as an example for strict free market reforms, let's focus on one Washington Consensus. So the Washington Consensus was based on policies like deregulation or the removing rules on businesses. We also have the privatization, the selling government-owned companies, and the free trade. While it aimed to boost efficiency, it often left economies more vulnerable to crisis and did not address long-term problems like inequality or environmental damage. So, for example, in many Latin American countries, it led to rising debt, social unrest, and unstable growth because it focused too much on short-term results. The model also created poverty traps where the poor stay poor and weak domestic demand, making economies fragile. This showed the serious limits of a one size fits all approach. So I have a question for you guys. In your opinion, do you think somehow we the Philippines use this Washington consensus style model? That's why we have this poverty traps. So let me know in the comment section. Now, moving forward, for the state-led strategies, East Asian countries like Japan, South Korea, and China grew rapidly by using state-led strategies where governments actively guided the direction of the economy. Through industrial policies, they supported key industries such as cars, steel, and electronics, while also investing heavily in education, technology, and infrastructure. For example, South Korea built global brands like Samsung and Hyundai with government support, while China used long term planning and state owned enterprises to become a world leader in manufacturing. These experiences prove that there is no single universal formula for growth, and thus the different countries succeed with different approaches. And to understand more about pluralism, here's the varieties of capitalism, or the VOC, which is a way of understanding that not all capitalist economies work the same. Instead of one model, there are different types that succeed in different contexts. So there are two primary models. Number one, we have the liberal market economies, or the LMEs. These economies depend mostly on free competition and flexible markets. Companies rely on short-term profits and take big risks to make breakthroughs. And also, workers can easily move from one job to another, and firms compete fiercely. Example for this is within the United States, startups like Apple, Google, and Tesla grew quickly because investors were willing to risk money on new radical ideas. Next, we have the coordinated market economies, or the CMEs. So these economies focus on long-term cooperation and stability. The companies, banks, workers, and even the government coordinate and plan together. And instead of taking big risks, they make steady, careful improvements. So example are the Germany and the Japan. Germany's car industry, BMW, the Mercedes, and the Volkswagen produces high-quality cars by focusing on precision and long-term planning. In Japan, companies like Toyota and Sony succeed by improving products step by step, or the incremental innovation. And the key point here is LMEs grow fast through bold, risky innovation, while CMEs grow steadily through careful cooperation. Both models succeed in different ways, proving there's no single recipe for development. And why pluralism matters? So different types of economies make the global system stronger. The LMEs, like the USA, focus on quick changes and big new ideas, while CMEs, like Germany and Japan, focus on steady growth and long-term quality. Just like a bicycle needs two pedals to move forward, both models are needed to keep the world economy balanced. And the main point is that there's no single best way for countries to grow. By accepting and using different approaches, the world economy becomes more stable, flexible, and fair in the face of today's challenges. Thus, if economies are a complex system with no single path to success, then our measure of progress also need to change. We need to rethink for us to grow. So relying on only on GDP, which measures money and endless growth, ignores human well-being and the environment. For example, GDP may rise when factories produce more, right? But this also can mean pollution, climate change, or overuse of resources may arise also. Growth that harms nature and shifts costs to future generation is unsustainable. That's why we need new ways to define progress that balance prosperity, people, and the planet. But furthermore, GDP is too limited to show true progress. It only measures money based activity, not people well being or sustainability. For instance, if forests are cut for exports or if an oil spill requires cleanup, GDP goes up even though society and the environment suffer. This short-term focus hides deeper costs like resource depletion, debt, and climate damage. Because of this, because of these limits, economies argue we need new ways of thinking about progress. And this progress leads to the three main approaches: the more growth, or the green adjustments, the amended growth, or the adding well-being indicators, and the end of growth, or the shifting focus beyond GDP entirely. So these approaches reflect different answers to the question of how to build a sustainable and fair future. Now let's go to the approach one, the more growth or with adjustments. So this approach says that the growth can continue, but it must be cleaner and smarter. Instead of stopping growth, the goal is to fix problems it creates, like the pollution, climate change, and also the waste. For example, renewable energy such as wind and solar power is replacing coal, while electric cars like Tesla reduce dependence on fossil fuels. Countries also like the European Union use carbon pricing, making companies pay more if they pollute, which pushes them to invest in greener options. For governments, they can help by funding green projects and passing laws that encourage sustainable innovation. In short, this approach keeps growth but tries to make it compatible with the long term environmental and societal stability. Next, we have the approach to the amended growth. So, for approach to amended growth, agrees that GDP is useful, but it is not enough to measure real progress. This approach suggests that we must add other indicators that capture people's well-being and sustainability. For example, the Human Development Index, or the HDI, combines income, life expectancy, and education to measure human progress more fully. In Bhutan, Bhutan uses gross national happiness, or the GNH, focusing on cultural values, community, and the environment, while Canada's Index of Well-being measures the health, the education, environment, and community engagement. These examples show that progress is not just about producing more, but about how people live, their opportunities, and the sustainability of their society. So the challenge is that there's still no global standard, but the idea is clear. Growth should be measured in terms of quality of life, not just quantity of output. And also, I would like to connect it here in the Philippines. So, why do you think many Filipinos want to migrate in Canada or in Australia? Yes, it is because of the quality of their life there, having free healthcare to seniors, and at the same time having these benefits. And next slide for our last approach, the end of growth, or the new concept. This approach argues that endless growth is not realistic because the planet's resources are limited and many big innovations have already been achieved. Instead of pushing for more consumption and production, the focus should shift to quality of life, community services, and sustainability. For example, investing more in public health, education, clean energy, and local food systems can improve people's lives without relying on constant economic expansion. Some European countries like Denmark and Finland are experimenting with policies that emphasize happiness, work life balance, and green living rather than just the GDP growth. So the idea is not to stop progress, but to redefine it, valuing well being, equality, and the environment more than endless consumption. And to end our discussion, the environmental crisis, from plastic-filled oceans in the Philippines to rising global temperature and destructive typhoons linked to climate change, remind us that growth without responsibility has dangerous consequences. Pollution, global warming, and the catching up race of developing countries have put huge pressure on our planet's resources. To address this, we must move towards sustainable development where economic stability goes hand in hand with protecting the environment. Real world cases show different pathways like Bhutan's gross national happiness, the Germany's coordinated market model, and the European carbon pricing that all highlights that there is no one size fits all solution. That is why pluralism in development models and new approaches to growth, whether greener growth, broader well-being measures, or rethinking growth entirely are essential. The way forward is to redefine progress not just in terms of GDP, but in terms of resilience, human well being, and environmental balance, ensuring a better future for the next generation. That is all for my part.
Thank you, Ms. Velasco. So now, we will be presenting how environmental crisis and sustainable development is intersect with globalization, not just economically, but also politically and culturally. So this topic explores how global systems shapes our responses to sustainability and why understanding these connections is crucial for long-term impact. So globalization drives economic growth by boosting the trade, production, and consumption across the countries. But this rapid expansion also leads to serious environmental consequences like the pollution, waste, and resource depletion. Industries often use more energy and materials than the planet can sustain, and transnational companies sometimes relocate to places with weaker environmental laws to cut costs. In short, economic progress without sustainability puts long-term environmental health at risk. So, the economic side of globalization shows how deeply our choices affect the planet. Every product we buy, every business decision, and every policy we support creates ripple effects from globally and locally. So, true sustainable development isn't about stopping growth, but reshaping it to be irresponsible and future oriented. As consumers, professionals, and citizens, we each have a role in pushing for ethical practices and policies that protect both prosperity and the environment. So, globalization is powerful. It can either accelerate the destruction or drive the transformation. The choice is ours. And now, let's call Miss Valdez for continuation.
Next naman, pag-usapan natin ang political globalization at kung paano ito nakakaapekto sa environmental crisis at sustainable development. Dahil sa political globalization, ang lahat ng bansa ay mas nagiging connected at accountable sa isa't isa. Ibig sabihin ng mga problema tulad ng pollution at climate change ay hindi lang problema ng isang country dahil kapag may isang bansa ang nag-pollute, naapektuhan pati ang ibang bansa. Kaya nga, napipilitan ng mga governments na mag-cooperate at gumawa ng policies na sabay-sabay sa buong mundo dahil hindi na pwedeng kanya-kanya lang ang solusyon. Makikita natin to sa mga international agreements tulad ng Paris Climate Agreement at ng UN Sustainable Development Goals. Dito nagkakasundo ang mga bansa na bawasan ang emissions at protektahan ang environmental bilang shared political responsibility. Dahil sa political globalization, nagkakaroon ng sharing ng green technology, funding ng eco-projects at pagbuo ng environmental policies na sinusunod ng maraming bansa. Halimbawa, ang plastic waste mula sa isang bansa ay pwedeng mapunta sa dagat at makaapekto sa buong mundo. At ang mga green energy projects ay nagiging possible dahil sa cooperation ng iba't ibang bansa. So for the reflection, malinaw na dahil sa political globalization, ang environmental problems ay responsibilidad nating lahat. Kapag may isang bansa na hindi nag-iingat sa kalikasan, ramdam ito ng buong mundo. Kaya hindi pwedeng solo effort lang, kailangan ng global cooperation. Ang Paris Climate Agreement ay maganda example kung paano ang mga bansa na nagtutulungan para makamit yung shared goals. Pero hindi lang government ang may role, ang sustainable development ay shared responsibility. Government na nag-invest sa renewable energy, communities na sumasali sa tree planting at reforestation programs, at tayo bilang individuals na nagbabawas ng plastic at nag-aalaga ng environment. Sa madaling salita, dahil sa political globalization, mas nagiging connected ang mundo at lahat tayo ay may part na protektahan ng planeta para sa susunod na henerasyon. For the culture, let me call Miss Velasco.
Thank you, Miss Valdez. And for this slide, we have the culture, environmental crisis, and sustainable development. For this slide, globalization shows how culture are connected through shared ideas, lifestyle, and values. Because of this, the way people consume resources in one country can affect the environment. The spread of consumer culture has led to overconsumption, fast fashion, and single use plastics, which increase waste and environmental damages. But however, globalization is not entirely negative. It also helps spread environmental awareness and sustainable practices through global initiatives like Earth Hour and World Environment Day, encouraging people worldwide to become more environmentally responsible. As we move to the next slide, globalization as a cultural process plays a major role in both the environmental crisis and sustainability efforts. While global consumer habits have intensified pollution and resource depletion, cultural exchange has also created a sense of shared responsibility among nations. Through these connections, sustainability becomes more than just a government policy. It turns into a global cultural value where societies work together to adopt eco-friendly practices and address environmental challenges. And that's all for our presentation. Thank you for listening. God bless.